Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Penn Vicarage on this Wednesday morning. Lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us for our Bible talk for the day as we continue our adventure through the incredible book of Genesis. And it's quite a book. It's fascinating. There's some amazing stuff in it. There's some big highs and some big lows. There's some very exciting and full of meaning passages. There's some passages which are downright difficult as well. And we are picking up today in Genesis chapter 6 as we start the adventure of Noah's Ark and so on. So without further ado, Genesis chapter 6 it is. When people began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that they were fair, and they took wives for themselves of all that they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in mortals forever, for they are flesh. Their days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humans who bore children to them. These were heroes that were of old, warriors of renown. The Lord saw that the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he'd made humankind on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have created, people together with animals and creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favour in the sight of the Lord. These are the descendants of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God, and Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with the violence because of them. Now I am going to destroy them along with the earth. Make yourself an ark of cypress wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above, and put a door on the ark on its side. Make it with lower, second and third decks. For my part, I am going to bring a flood of waters on the earth, to destroy from under heaven all flesh which is the breath of life. Everything which is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every kind with you into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, and of every creeping thing on the ground according to its kind. 2 of every kind shall come into you, to keep them alive. Also take with you every kind of food that is eaten, and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, so where are we at? Okay, so in Genesis chapter 1, God made the world. In Genesis chapter 2, God made the world. And then in chapter 3, we have the business about sin coming into the world. Adam and Eve eating of the fruit they're not supposed to eat. And the rest of this day is history. And you see in chapter 3, when it first happens, when Adam and Eve start blaming each other and so on. And then you get the incident with Cain and Abel, Cain killing his brother Abel, and so on. And then you get violence and the whole thing's, and by the time you get to chapter 5 and chapter 6, as we discovered yesterday, things have gone downhill all the way. And early in chapter 6, you kind of get the picture of just how bad the world had got. First, you've got all sorts of hedonism, you might say. You have all sorts of people going in and having as many sort of wives as they want, and if they want it, they take it. And all sorts of impropriety, shall we say, is going on here. People sort of, it says making wives, but I think it means just having it away with, and so on. So there's also what you might call hedonism going on here. There's also, if you read slightly later, there's lots of violence going on in the world. And the earth becomes corrupt and violent, and so on. Not only that, you've got pride as well. I think there's the implication here that people are not doing God's will anymore. People are sort of thinking that they're better So you end up with the heroes that were of old renown, and there's an implication that somehow they know better than God. There's kind of a bit of pride going on here. And there's also this business about the Nephilim in verse 4, which I have to say is an incredibly difficult verse. I mean, there have been all sorts of theories what that means. You get the impression is kind of the Nephilim are kind of half heavenly, half earthly beings who are having relationships with humans and so on. So basically you've got all sorts of inappropriate relationships, shall we say, going on. So you can see in the beginning of Genesis chapter 6 that what started with Adam and Eve went on to Cain and Abel, and then just gets worse and worse and worse. And the world, by the time we get to this stage, is in a total mess. So the first thing God does is God shortens their lives. You noticed in chapter 5 when we had the genealogy yesterday's reading, we noticed that every one of them resoundingly died. So you got the picture that the death had come into the world, as God said it would in Genesis chapter 2. Eat that fruit and you will surely die. Death came in, but they were still living for sort of 800, 900 years. And you get the impression that because the world has got so awfully corrupt, God said, hey, we're not having this. So God shortened their days from 800 to about 120, and you get that very clearly here. So God kind of shortens their days too. And then you get that incredibly sad verse in verse 6. I mean, so the first bit is that the world has made a complete mess of it. Then in verse 6, there's devastating words, where I think it's just really, and the Lord was sorry that he'd made humankind on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So thanks to the wickedness of humankind, the world was now a mess. And in verse 6, you have God being so sad and grieved, and very sad that and wished he'd never made the world. And feel free to feel the devastation that is in that. And notice here, it shows us clearly that God is not a force field, that God has personality, that we can grieve the Spirit of God, that God can be happy, but God can also be sad. And here in verse 6, we have God who's made the world with such beauty, with such majesty, because of the wickedness of mankind. He now says he wishes he'd never made the world. Okay, as we get that there. And because of that, God then thinks about just throwing it away basically, and getting rid of it, because it has become an awful. But even in the midst of this sadness and this grief of God, God's nature is to show mercy. In the midst of all this badness that's going on, there is one man who's kept on doing it right, and that's Noah. And we hear about Noah that like Enoch in chapter 5, Noah was a man who walked with God, who lived with God and talked to God and lived his life with God. He was despite the people he was amongst, he walked with God. And the book of Genesis is very keen to especially in the chapters 5, to make you see that the righteousness of Noah. I mean, even in chapter 5, we have the genealogy. You have Lamech, who is Noah's dad, and in chapter 4, the genealogy had him being quite an unpleasant, violent character. It doesn't mention that in chapter 5, because it's trying to show you what a good guy Noah is. Noah was a good person. And interesting, throughout the rest of chapter 6, you have God telling Noah what Noah is to do. And notice that Noah believes God. I don't know if you've seen Evan Almighty or films like that, where the whole the idea that God pops up one day and tells you to build an ark in the middle of the land somewhere, and what he must have looked like to the neighbours, God only knows, literally. But here you have Noah, who has faith in God, who walks with God, who does what God says to the letter, and he does that, and he makes this ark. And interesting enough, one final twerk before we finish is that the word ark, people tend to think of ark as a ship, and of course it was a floating ship here, but the word ark actually means a treasure chest. We talk about the Ark of the Covenant, which comes in a few chapters later, where you have in the book of Exodus and so on, where you have a box, a treasure chest with lots of godly things in. Well, actually, what the ark here is God's floating treasure chest that he commands Noah to make. So you have this man of God who walks with God, who shows faith in God, who does what God says, And at God's command, which must look very strange to the neighbours, he makes this ark. He makes this floating treasure chest on which God's rescue plan was formed and hatched. Friends, I hope that makes sense. So feel here just what a mess the world was in. Feel here the devastation of God and his regret having made the world. Feel then the despite that regret, that God's mercy, he's not going to wipe out Noah because Noah's a good man, and feel the righteousness of Noah, the Noah's faithfulness in doing what God said, in believing in God, and that was counted him for righteousness. That he believed, trusted in God, and did what God wants, and he made this ark, this floating treasure chest, full of God's treasure, the seed for human race yet to come, and animals for yet to come. Friends, I hope that makes sense. God bless you. More tomorrow. Enjoy your Wednesday. Have a lovely day, and do share these messages with your friends, and